All right, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Colin. I'm our Vice President of Alliances here with Provectus. Um, and by we, I mean everyone in the back here. Raise your hands with the Provectus. We are the Provectus team. We are part of the Anthropic Partner Network. I'm really excited to be here. This is our sixth Claude Code workshop, foundations level. So we're getting pretty good at these right now. We've been using the tooling internally at Provectus to deliver outcomes for our customers. And so we have an understanding from how it is that we use it, as well as been enabled and certified by Anthropic to present workshops just like this. So the moment that we're in it's just so exciting. And we see it done these globally. We see the same sort of enthusiasm in the room today every time we tool at the workshop. So really excited for this today and for all of us here to meet you where you are on your journey with using agentic coding tools to deliver, whatever use cases you're looking to deliver. So a couple logistics before I dig a little bit deeper into Provectus, and then turn it over on this for the actual workshop itself. The Wi-Fi is here. The password is here, right? The restrooms, if you go out the door, go this way, are there. You've seen some of the Provectus people. Many of us have spoken to you. If you have any questions throughout, just wave us down. We're happy to help. So a little bit about Provectus, who we are. As I said, we've partnered closely with Anthropic. We've used their tools, their models to help fully use cases across enterprises. We have a technical depth of 400 people. You've met about 6 of us in the room here, but the whole team globally to help support our customers. We like to solve really challenging AI problems. And we've been in business for 15 years now. At first, it was migrating our clients to the cloud. Then it became, what do we do with all this extra data that's in the cloud? So we started really adopting machine learning methodologies. And as soon as ChatGPT launched in November of 2022, it blew our minds as far as the art of the possible with the acceleration of the AI age for it today. We started adding those models to our toolkit, to our methodology for how to help our customers embrace AI across the enterprise, to take really exciting tools and apply it to enterprise use cases that can help either cost savings or accelerate business outcomes by integrating AI to the product. So this is a company that's in our DNA to really focus in on cutting edge innovation to help our clients take advantage of the latest tools. So a little bit about us. Come in and kind of ask any of us here if you have more questions about how we help. When we think about today, this workshop we're doing today, there's an agenda on the desk in front of you. We're going to do about an hour's worth of presentation on this here. Our AI engineer and staff, AI director of engineering as well as staff engineer will help walk us through that. That'll be a demo from Pavel, our solution architect in the back, who is going to help walk through a real life use case of building skill. And then we'll do a workshop where we'll dive deep into the actual step-by-step of the workshop itself. There's public breaks in between, so we look forward to networking with everyone. So this is the foundations class workshop we're doing today. This track 1. As we think about what comes next after today, we put some thought into how it is that we think enterprises should start adopting Claude Code, agentic coding across the enterprise. So you can think about this one as a hands-on onboarding from basics, from subagents, hooks, custom skills, using an actual code base. And then the track 2 is more about leveling up to marketplace plugins, MCP servers, autonomous execution loops, strategies for modernizing legacy code bases, taking one of your code bases perhaps and thinking about how we would use agentic coding to modernize a specific application, something medium risk, not going to break the business, but not totally worthless as well. Something where people will be excited about the momentum and creating that momentum within your enterprise and focusing on what next steps would look like. Track 3 would be enterprise enablements, learning how to plan cross-functional rollouts with PM specs. Agents build workflows, QA verify, autonomously design, refine brand books, visual tools, enabling the whole delivery chain to work with agentic tools. And then tracks 4 and 5 are a little bit more focused on things that are really important that we hear from our customers. Helen, with our financial services expert, she comes from industry, has been really focused on helping us understand AI governance and security, really where it is that the agentic tooling meets the enterprise InfoSec teams, and make sure that we can explain all the activities that are happening and the tools that we're using so that you can get a great light to use those tools. And then thinking about co-work beyond engineering, this is exciting for people like me who are non-technical, how it is that these tools how it is that I can use these tools in my everyday workflow to accelerate the outcomes that I look for. So this is how we're thinking about what comes next. Come ask us, though. It may not be linear, track 2, 3, 4, maybe something we start with 5 and work our way backwards. Let's think about the best way to make sense for you and your business. With that, I'll pass over to your presenter today, Thomas.
That you caught. Yeah, so you can see that there is a pretty massive, ecosystem of skills to learn, and yeah, kind of a steep learning curve. Today, what we'll cover are essentially the fundamentals of using Claude Code, which hopefully will help you build a bit of an intuition for how to move into that kind of rich ecosystem of Gen AI or agentic AI tool. Again, this is our team. The top row are kind of more technical people that can help you as you move into the technical part of the seminar that start working on code in the workshop. So we'll be building around, and then if you're interested in Provectus services or speaking to us more about future workshops and so on, the bottom row of people are probably the most helpful to talk to. And yeah, in all cases, we'll try to point you in the right direction, whatever you may be interested in. So very, very briefly about my background. I've been in tech as a software engineer, architect, an engineering leader since 1998 or so, mostly in the Bay Area. My family is from Latvia, so I spent a little time living over there and have done IT and tech in Europe as well. Most of the last decade or so has been focused on data engineering and enterprise scale AI and ML systems. Recently, I worked at Figure 8, which was bought by Appen and was a human-in-the-loop data annotation platform for training ML prototypes. We worked at many FANG-level companies as well as smaller companies. I've worked as VP of engineering at Fluence, which was building a predictive analytics platform for bidding in electricity markets. And I've worked in building AI systems for hospitality travel as well. And now at Provectus, I kind of stepped away from engineering leadership and went back to almost 100% of my time coding and living in a terminal. And here I design and develop production agentic systems, multi-agent architectures, MCP integrations, client prototypes and reference implementations for our own engineering team. And we work on a lot of that kind of stuff. I also obtained a Claude architect certification from Anthropic. It also did the non-new cohort. So we are trying to rank up, and I think we're at 5 or 6 people now at Provectus who haven't gained that certification, and trying to develop knowledge. So I'm also very much a developer, not an evangelist or a professional speaker, so bear with me if I pause for a moment to collect my thoughts here and there. So as you probably know, if you're attending this workshop, agentic software engineering, like many other technologies we've encountered past 20 or 30 years, has been developing little by little, and then all of a sudden recently, all at once. For anyone, it has been challenging to keep up with how quickly the technology is developed. So if I may, let me just ask a short question. Who here, please raise your hand if you have a legitimate agentic system, multi-agent workflow rushing in production, having an impact on your business or your bottom line right now. Okay. And who here is starting to experiment with evals or harnesses or setting up agentic systems locally? Okay, so a few more hands. So we got no hands, then we got +4 or 5 hands. And who here has played with Claude Code or with the Anthropic ecosystem? Again, 2/3, maybe a third. And so that lines up very, very precisely with what's shown here. This is a study from Anthropic from March of this year, so a few months back. If you can't read all the fine print, that's okay, but the graphic is the main part I want to share. In red is the actual implementation of agentic systems by sector. So the sectors are things like transportation management, business and finance, computer and math, architecture and engineering, and so forth. And in blue is what Anthropic estimates to be the actual agentic capability of the tooling that's already built and available to public. So you can see that an extremely small percentage of people have already started leveraging what's available. And so with each new model release as well, that blue zone keeps growing rather quickly. And there are exceptions, of course, but needless to say, it's often not enough to just write a half-page agent definition. Building robust agentic systems introduces a very steep learning curve. Each may be composed of many different components, agents and subagents, skills and commands, hooks, MCP tools, all possibly packaged into plugins and marketplaces, workflows, recently even cloud-based API connections like managed agents. For production use, all systems need to be evaluated, hardened against edge cases, tested for cost effectiveness, etc. So what this top-bitted workshop aims to give you is to essentially set you on the right path for deeper understanding and better intuition for all of those factors. This is roughly what we'll cover. It is a fundamental or a Claude Code fundamentals course, but I will try to give you kind of a taste of some more advanced approaches, and Pavel will show you a multi-agent system running. So that should kind of whet your appetite for what's possible using the tools that we'll share today. So first, we'll introduce you to the main concepts needed for mastery of Claude Code in terms of the internals. Then we'll provide you with a quick demo to hopefully expand your understanding of what's possible. Then we'll jump straight into a hands-on lab that will take something like an hour or so, maybe a little bit less for those who are quick. And finally, we'll give you some demo prompts to experiment with independently that should kind of expand your horizon a little bit in terms of what Claude could do. And we'll try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So put simply, hopefully the goals of this workshop are clear at this point. We want to give you a clear understanding of the basics of how Claude Code works, hands-on experience developing with Claude, so in a scenario that kind of reflects what you would do in your day-to-day life as someone in engineering or adjacent to engineering. And lastly, we definitely encourage you to talk to each other, ask questions, share your experiences. It's an opportunity, to be with like-minded people with like interests. So definitely chat with each other and network as well. That's welcome and encouraged. All right, so enough of intro talk and let's finally get to it. So moving on to essentially the internals of Claude Code. How did we get here and what is it? I think it's worth covering sort of the evolution of AI coding tools just to sort of share some perspective. I, for example, hear many people say things like, I work with Cursor, not Claude. But that's a bit of a faulty statement in that they are different tools with different internals kind of intended for different purposes, though they certainly do have an overlap. And I'll explain what I mean. So many of us have worked with LSP-based autocomplete for many years. And when those arrived, they felt like magic, I think, at least to me. And I'm sure to many of you. In 2022 or so, GitHub Copilot appeared and kind of changed the game. Suddenly, your editor understood intent, not just syntax. And then kind of VS Code variants like Cursor, Windsurf, and Zed, and others said it is Rust and on its own, but many others were kind of built on that concept further by building entire IDEs around AI. So features like multi-file edits showed up in inline chat, deeper code base awareness. I personally, for example, remember very vividly the jump from having to explicitly introduce a file at the context with an ampersand to all of a sudden, I think Windsurf did it first, where the context, the whole repo was just known to the agent. And all of a sudden you could do much more expansive work and brainstorm and build features that impact repository that wasn't possible before. And then in early 2025 or so, fully agentic tools that were highly flexible and customizable like Claude Code moved beyond the IDE altogether. So you could plan a task, could execute across files, run commands, iterate, all from the terminal with a suite of highly customized Volt agents and skills, MCP tools and so on. And to be, totally fair, of course, IDEs have extensions and so on, but it's a slightly more opinionated architecture and a little bit more rigid and prescriptive than a completely open CLI tool that I can do almost anything it's imagined with. So many developers now use both a native IDE tool for fast edits, convenience of a visual, a good UI for tracking Git, so forth, and then a coding agent for bigger projects. That's kind of common pattern. One of Claude Code's most powerful and expansive features is its complete programmatic flexibility and customizability according to whatever your agenda you use. And so if we now take that concept and we talk about it from a different perspective, under the hood, LLM applications have followed kind of a similar arc if you look at how the agentic systems work. In the early days of BERT, when the first LLM started appearing, we started with single call features, basically things like summarization, classification, and extraction. One prompt in, one response out. And many of us are familiar with this in the form of autocomplete for dev work, in IDEs or LLMs, so the text summarization, that kind of stuff. Then the next jump was starting to orchestrate multiple model calls and predefined control or control flows. So this is where the IDEs appeared and started providing more convenient flows to do development and to work with agentic systems. And next, unlike workflows, agents sort of decide their own trajectories. So they are operating independently based on environmental feedback and stated objectives. The model takes an action, observes the environment, and loops until a task is done with a human in the loop to steer or stop. So what's next is more of everything. Greater autonomy, stronger capabilities, persistent memory and cross sessions, essentially all that infrastructure tooling around what a model needs to function will continue improving. And already now models are becoming more and more autonomous, and long running models are becoming more and more common. So we define agents as AI systems that can autonomously plan and execute complex tasks. This is our focus today. And so to operate autonomously, agents have to learn from their environment, then plan and act based on that. This is often referred to as the agentic loop. So I'll touch on that for a moment, but to kind of sum up, at the risk of being tedious to review, Claude Code brings together a UI, models, hooks, tools based on the MCP, skills, commands, a harness with features like context assembly, permissions engine, a session state management framework, all to govern that agentic loop that runs the thinking engine that is Claude Code. And we'll go into a lot of these things in more depth, but that's sort of what the system is and an intro and how it works. So if we talk about the agentic loop for a moment, it's essentially plan, act, and reflect as a consistent pattern that begins with us providing input as a directive prompt. So the agent takes that directive into account, and with the help of all the tools and memory that we give it, it will build context and understanding about how to achieve that objective that we've shared. And eventually it will build a plan. And then it will ask for us to approve that plan and begin implementation. And when it's finished with the implementation, the agent will then take stock of what it has built and assess the results, possibly with tests or browser, and it will commit those findings to memory and possibly generate a new plan to make adjustments and so on. This cycle will repeat over and over again until we reach some sort of an outcome. And this may sort of seem half obvious to many of you, but if you as a user are aware of that flow, you're often working more in harmony with the natural structure and sequence of that agentic loop. And so Claude Code's modes also very loosely reflect the stages of this workflow. By default, you can switch with Shift-Tab between the default mode for normal chat and exploration, plan mode for analysis of a stated objective, and the generation of a plan document as output, and then accept edits or recently auto mode to keep annoying permissions checks to a minimum when you are ready to start. And I should, of course, mention that for those living on the edge, there's also the dangerously skip permissions config flag, or aka YOLO mode, which can be set by editing your config and can basically just set Claude to do whatever it pleases and run for a long time without prompt. One of the most popular kind of mnemonics for typical personal Claude Code workflow is EPCC, or Explore, Plan, Code, Commit. I personally also think of testing, refinement, and documentation as sort of indispensable parts of that cycle, but nothing catchy comes to mind for EPCTRDC. If you remember anything, rather than trying to remember explore, plan, code, test, refine, document, commit, just remember that it's worth exploring and planning thoroughly before you start coding. Don't take the first answer. Claude is always eager to get going and be off to the races, but it's always advisable to really take time to review the plan, get to a point where you feel somewhat confident with it, and feel like you're familiar with the plan that you're ready to start with a high degree of confidence that you'll be successful. Claude is also very happy to help with that. You can ask it to explore things, to go back and forth with you, to explain something to you. It's very accommodating in that way. So now I think we've gone over internals, we've gone over kind of common workflows to internalize as a developer or a knowledge worker doing technical work. Then I think we could now jump into some of the elements or the primitives in that ecosystem. As sort of a first pass, we'll cover the introduction level capabilities to give you a solid foundation and some intuition, and then we'll move on to slightly more advanced tools. But I'd say these three are really basic things that are great to know, that kind of are worth talking about for a moment before we go into the larger ecosystem. And I'll also go into each of these in more detail. In general, CLAUDE.md can be thought of as persistent context or information in various levels, depending on file's location. Generally speaking, CLAUDE.md files help Claude understand and know valuable context, so emphasis on the know part. MCP tools make adding new tools or data connections, typically from external systems that Claude can use, much easier. So MCP tools usually give Claude more abilities or integrations to external systems and allow Claude to do or execute things. Many people talk about an analogy that MCP is like a USB cord. For anyone doing development for a long time, probably familiar with an adapter pattern. It's simply a standard interface to not have to rebuild that interface for each new tool that Claude interacts with. So I can use the conventions of that protocol to connect to a really wide variety of external systems or tools and really make Claude much more powerful than typically by default. And then lastly, slash commands are maybe one of the most simple ways to automate routines that you repeat often, like making git commits or updating documentation. Commands and skills, which are very closely related, often provide the how to do things. They're essentially save prompts or can prompts stored as markdown files. So here already you start kind of seeing, or maybe you're starting to form the mental map of know and do, and the instructions on how to do. So you're seeing how you're kind of starting to equip the agent with different capabilities that will help it reach the objectives that you're looking to accomplish. So this ecosystem is much, much larger. This is Anthropic slide from a few months ago. They're moving so fast and releasing so many features that I think this would probably be about 40% longer at this point from all of the new releases that they've had. But to just kind of skim over this, we went over CLAUDE.md, we went over custom slash commands and MCP tools. Stills are very similar to slash commands, but load slightly differently and often run in your conversation automatically. So they can be triggered explicitly or implicitly. Yes, you're welcome to take photographs of anything that seems useful. Whereas commands are only invoked explicitly usually. So that's a key difference of skills. And another, I'll go into this more later, skills are also more portable in that they are easy to import into things like Claude Desktop. It will work in either Claude Code or Claude Desktop. Hooks like lifecycle methods in JavaScript or mobile programming can be set to run based on specific triggers or events and are a great way to automate processes or enforce standards. So this is, aside from prompt engineering, one of the first directions I started looking in. If someone is saying, I'm not getting deterministic output, I mean more regularity, trustworthiness from an LLM. Hooks are a great kind of insurance policy for some of that. Plugins bundle all of the above mentioned primitives, including subagents and additional things that I mentioned, into easy to manage marketplaces. So they make installing and uninstalling large amounts of tooling much more convenient and easy. And then finally, there are a few different kinds of agents. Here you'll see subagents, which are very analogous if you encountered the task tool or plan and explore tools. Those are actually subagents. They're just built into Claude. But some of the main advantages of subagents are that they run in their own isolated context. So if you are managing a longer, let's say, session and you want to conserve your token usage, then subagents are an incredibly effective way to parcel away work and conserve that main thread and only get the results back. So something like the Explorer subagent is incredibly effective because it'll go traverse all kinds of different files, review them, and then return only a condensed summary of what you're looking for and not consume all of that main thread's context. There's a lot of other stuff on here, and I won't advantage in the time we have to touch on all of it, but we'll go into more depth in a few of these. So hopefully that kind of starts giving you an overview of the Claude Code basic ecosystem and all of things that you have at your disposal to build this. At this point, I think we could go into a little bit more depth on the Claude.md file. By convention, it has different functions depending on where in file tree it's located. This is one of two gotchas that many people often overlook when they're starting out. So most often you'll see it at the repository root right next to a README file to define things like coding and deployment standards or the directory structure or how to build or test and things like that. Basically project-specific rules in a repository. Claude reads this file when it opens a session. It tries to follow the conventions you set when interacting with the code base. So you can think of Claude.md as Claude's README file and README file as something for users. That's generally how I tend to organize the information. So Claude.md tends to be a little bit more technical and dry and kind of runtime information that's useful to Claude. Whereas the README is oriented toward the user and what they need to know to use the system and set expectations about where to find what they'll get from the application and so forth. You can also run /init when you're first getting started to build a Claude.md file, but that's sort of, that feature has gone up and down over the months, and definitely don't just default to that. That's a starting point, not a result. So use init to get started in at the repo, but then go and look at that CLAUDE.md file, edit it manually, and make sure that kind of you're happy with what's there. Another thing to be aware of is that in terms of context usage, CLAUDE.md files are probably among the most impactful to using of your context, since they get loaded every single session. And I'll go into a little bit more depth with that. But if you want to analyze that a little bit, you can use the /context command and see your context usage by type. But that is why sometimes you'll hear practitioners saying keep your CLAUDE.md files as short as possible, is because it's getting loaded on a regular basis during your sessions and consuming that scarce context that you have for a running session. So here is kind of a more detailed overview of the different variants of CLAUDE.md. Yes, please.
It's said that then that you'll send some query on it.
No, it loads, well, depending on where it is, I'll get into that. But let's say you launch a session in a repository, then that CLAUDE.md file that's at repository root will get loaded at the beginning of the session, and it will be held in context from there moving forward. If you have CLAUDE.mds, let's say in subdirectories like front end or back end, so on, Claude will only load that when you when it goes into that directory and is doing work there, etc. So it won't collect all of the CLAUDE.md files until it needs that. It sort of reads that passively as it works through the directory. And sorry, I have a bad habit. Not for you questions. Gentleman was asking when CLAUDE.md files get loaded in a session. So I've kind of gone from bottom up. This is the one I started with at the base of the repo. You might have one if you're using a mono repo at the very highest level in a repository as well. And then you have your own personal CLAUDE.md file that would be in the .claude folder of your user directory. And these are different in that the purple one on the top right there is the place to hold your own personal preferences and settings. My CLAUDE.md file is getting shorter and shorter as the Claude model is getting more and more intelligent and capable. The things I generally keep in there are things like my GitHub profile, maybe some of the tools I use, maybe an index of repositories that I'm working with. Even that is in auto memory now. But basically things I notice while I work that I would like Claude to be aware of to prevent it from asking me the same questions or spending tokens to figure something out over and over again. And the other gotcha is that these take precedence over each other in ways that can be surprising to devs that aren't familiar with this model. So if I have contradictions among CLAUDE.md files, let's say I am telling Claude to use pip in my personal user CLAUDE.md, but then I go into a repo and it says use ub, the repo CLAUDE.md will win. And I, as a developer, might be very confused as to why it's not following those instructions. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, but you have to be aware of that scope and precedence in order to design that intentionally. And I can also override everything by having a local CLAUDE.local.md, which isn't shown here, which isn't checked into Git, that will override this in turn. So there's a fairly rich ecosystem of precedents that's worth kind of spending a little time digging through documentation to learn. Yes, please.
Sorry, could you remind me what the best practice was? You mentioned something like you should keep it very slim in these CLAUDE.md files, or how deep should it go? Because readmes can also be very expansive, right?
Sure. The question was, what are kind of general best practices on length? I think the official recommendation for personal Claude file is under 45K or 50K, which is 200 lines on average, depending on how long your lines are. I find that that's more than enough for anything I might want to put in there, and that the models, like I said, are getting smarter and smarter. I think to kind of go into further depth, there are all kinds of tricks to share as much context as you need on an ad hoc basis. So there is a concept called ghouls, which is wonderful, that you can use to basically set up file name filters. So if I want to add rules that only apply to Python files, I could set up a rule that will only fire if Claude is dealing with with those files. So I can do that ad hoc loading with a submodule pattern. I can also use rules to even have finders or any loading. And those are ways where you can try to conserve as much of that context as possible. Those are some best practices, but if I tried to summarize all of that as briefly as possible, I would just say, get everything that you feel you need to get in there and then refine it a few times to try to make it more and more brief. Also, I would encourage experimenting with how much the model actually knows without you telling it anything. So it's worth asking it a few questions. It has basic Python, like pretty advanced Python programming skills built into it, for example. So you don't need to reteach all of that to the model anymore. It's quite capable. But if there are specifics that are particular to your project or the architecture that you're building or your company internals that Claude has no way of telling you, those are definitely the kind of things that are worth putting in. So hopefully that answers the question. And yeah, like I said, the beauty of this is that these rules and these submodules, they all work together to compose a more deliberate way of using context. One piece of feedback we got during the workshop was that it would be good to talk about memory a little bit. This is a slightly, I will argue, more advanced subject with a lot of gotchas and nuances to it, but to kind of give you a 3-slide overview, Claude Code's memory system has been rebuilt maybe 2 or 3 times in the last year or so. It launched in February 2025 with a single CLAUDE.md file, and then, if I'm not getting my dates wrong, over the course of 2025, maybe mid-2025, Scope, a lot of the things I was just describing, was introduced in the same pattern or a very similar pattern as CLAUDE.md. There is also an additional policy for IT that is saved deep in your user's applications library folder that supersedes all of these that can be used to store memories at an IT administrator level. And then roughly in Feb of this year, auto memory was introduced, where Claude started writing its own notes about your project autonomously. Just last week at Claude Code with Claude, the Code with Claude event, Anthropic announced a concept called dreaming, which, a lot like REM sleep consolidated human memories, is an automatic routine that will run every 24 hours or I think half a dozen sessions or so to kind of prune context, look for contradictions, and try to determine how to keep that context clean and free of confusing or contradictory information. Today, I would say that the recommended setup is your choice of, at minimum, both the CLAUDE.md system and auto memory working together. So auto memory can handle repository-specific information and work more or less autonomously, and that you can contribute or redirect to some of that with CLAUDE.md as you like. And then arguably another layer, if you want to involve that, is an older system that was introduced in one of the original memory MCPs from Anthropic called the server-memory. And that is essentially knowledge graph in a file called memory.json, which if some of you have at some point installed that MCP, you'll see that file kicking around into your file system. What makes this still valuable is its portability. You can share a common set of memories between Claude Desktop and Claude Code, and it's more kind of prunable manually as some of the other systems are. And one really key gotcha that was a hard learned lesson for me was that it is grep based. So if you use the memory MCP, what it will often do is, for example, randomly, possibly save memories under slightly different repository names and generate duplicates. So what was really helpful for me is to put instructions in CLAUDE.md to always use the exact repository name to prevent these duplicates from being created and to have a slightly cleaner memory with that memory MCP specifically. That should probably have been an issue filed from me, which is my bad, just passing on valuable information. So in practice, thinking of memory as 3 complementary layers First, you have the CLAUDE.md files that you write and maintain. Keep these under 200 lines or 50K, 50 kilobytes. Focus on things Claude can't infer from the code itself, like build commands or naming conventions, architectural decisions. Use the rules directory with passcode, YAML, front matter to for module specific guidance or monorecos and things like that. Second, you have auto memory running. You can audit that at any time with a /memory command and promote anything stable like to CLAUDE.md if you prefer. On the bottom here, if you can read that, that's sort of what the directory structure for auto memory looks like. So a little bit like skill.md, you'll see it has a project specific folder, and then under memory, that's where it stores the main index of memories, and then below more specific files that get indexed about subjects in that repository as it needs. And then third, the new dreaming feature, which I believe right now is only in the managed agents platform, runs between sessions and handles cleanup. And here, I would say that this is most impactful for large scale context jobs like legal work. For instance, a company Harvey.ai reported that they got something like 6 times better performance on finishing projects with Dreaming turned on because of the particularities of legal work, where you have huge bodies of documents, contradictions, many things that can be confusing when the model's trying to manage context. So that's sort of a blitz over CLAUDE.md files and memory and how context is managed in terms of the Claude infrastructure. Now we could charge into kind of how to extend Claude Code even further and touch on some of these different primitives that I talked about earlier, but it's like the greater depth. My favorite MCP, and Paul will probably agree with me, is context setting. And what it does is it essentially has an external server that maintains links to the latest documentation on many different languages, Python or JavaScript, Rust, Elixir, whatever. And so I can use context center to simply look up the latest documentation on the latest version without thinking about anything. And so it just provides essentially some additional tooling that Claude doesn't have built in. Otherwise, it would have to go and do a Google search every time, look for what the latest documentation is, find a URL, then parse it, or all that is taken care of. So that's like off the top of my head a good example of it, or CP. And I'll go into more depth about those in a moment. So here are some of the main sections we'll cover. Hooks, MCP servers, as we just mentioned, plugins, skills, and finally subagents. Yes.
Give example of subagents where maybe things appropriate be used.
Sure. Yeah, I will go in more depth on each of these. So hang in there a moment and I'll get to that. So as mentioned before, commands are kind of the simplest customization point in Claude Code. Project commands live in the .claude folder in your home directory under commands if you're looking to set them up at a user level for yourself, or they can also live in as above in the repository under the .claude folder. So same idea of precedence. If you have them, the tilde being your home user directory, if you have them there and then you move into a repo, they will get kind of trumped by the repository local commands. So kind of keep your naming in mind. If they have the same name, they may get overridden. And in general, all these slides, you'll see kind of code structure or directory structure on the right, and then a short explanation on the left. Other things to know about commands. Claude is a CLI tool, so a lot of things like flash arguments, $1, $Q, and so on work with commands. You can also embed bash output into a prompt or markdown with a bang character, so you can kind of, security is something to keep in mind there, but there are a lot of possibilities of what you can do with commands. You can also set up tab completion or use YAML front matter to define allowed tools, descriptions, model choices, and things like that for commands as well. Skills on the next slide are kind of the recommended evolution of commands. So these may get deprecated at some point. Basically, skills, all commands can be moved into skills format and they'll run exactly the same. And that gives them some additional advantages like being discoverable and so forth. Skills, on the other hand, support slightly more functionality. So Claude can remember specialized procedures that you define as skills and then use them or apply automatically based on keywords or trigger words that you set up in your front matter. And I think Pablo will go over that in more detail. We'll show you what that looks like. But generally, this is the structure of a skill where you will have the name of the skill as the folder, and then a skill ND in all caps, so exactly that naming underneath. To import that into Claude Desktop, you simply zip that directory and then import it, and you'll have the same skill available there for you. And skills can be rather ornate. You can do a lot of fancy things with skills, add a more complicated directory structure, so forth. I would say that if you find that you are repeating yourself or writing a prompt of a similar nature over and over again, that should trigger an impulse for you. I should write a skill for this, or if a command, probably a skill. And skills can be incredibly helpful to engineering teams to sort of lessen the every developer does it their own way syndrome and start defining processes or templates or standards that can be then shared amongst the engineering team and used to kind of reach more consistent results or define, here's how we use these. Think of skills as a great way to kind of code practices, and I'll share a lot of that sort of detail as well. Skills, I would also say, are incredibly popular and have sort of proven to be one of the most popular kind of primitives of Claude Code, very widely used. Yes?
So maybe ask the my two questions. The context keeps growing, that we have moved toward new tasks so that we'll be able to continue asking a different set of questions. But how do we combine all those contexts? Because the context are so huge, and I don't want to delete the previous context also.
That's a great question. I'll give you a two-part answer. One is that skills are also great in this regard in terms of managing context because they are loaded with a model called progressive disclosure, which essentially only loads the front matter of the skill into context when you have it loaded, and then reads the rest of it when it gets fired or triggered. And so skills are a much more efficient way to manage context than, let's say, MCP tools are or CLAUDE.md files are, if they're not designed, as I was describing, a rest of disclosure way as well. So if you use the /context command, most commonly for most people, you will see that CLAUDE.md is eating up context, and then MCP tools, if you have a large, huge catalog of MCP tools that are loaded, are kind of usual suspect number two for eating up a lot of context. After that, it kind of becomes a little more inconsistent, but skills are often very polite in that sense that they only load front matter and load progressively. So a general kind of rule of thumb is if you can group your, let's say, different collections of agents, MCP tools, skills, etc. into plugins, and then install that plugin when you're doing that kind of work and uninstall it when you're doing something else. That's a good strategy for managing your context. That's very quick and immediate. And I generally keep the things that I use every day on a regular basis kind of loaded consistently. But then if I go in and do more specialized work like data analysis and charting or exploring a really large database or something like that, I might set up specific plugins for that. So hopefully that kind of helps you build some color or intuition around skills or context. I'll go into that on the, but I thought I saw another question.
Yeah, I was curious. does the technique of like telling Claude, hey, optimize this past these store convicts have provided and recommend like should it be a skill content, etc. Is that like a practice that works? Or do you have to actually own that and kind of think about, okay, I need to condense all of this and build the right skill, etc. How much can we tell Claude to do that themselves?
That's a great question. I would say, so the question was, how much of this sort of context engineering is Claude good at helping with on its own, and how much of it sort of do we as users need to take ownership, help, and understand it? And I would say that tooling is improving from week to week, and there are great skills out there like Skill Creator, Skill Dash Creator, which does A/B testing and is really, really helpful at creating skills. You can use commands like /agents to create agents with Claude's help, and absolutely ask Claude for help in designing these things. It's self-aware of these primitives and so forth. And there is a huge ecosystem of different tools out there in GitHub and so on that people are sharing, and not all of them are great. Some of them are wonderful, others are maybe a little bit, less so, but there's a lot out there to kind of look through for almost anything that you might be doing. So those are some strategies, and absolutely use Claude to assess what's been written. And generally, it's quite helpful in that regard.
Like, how much does it compact that? What's a really common word compact?
Yes. So I find that compaction is sort of getting taken care of more and more as model context gets bigger, and I'm running /clear more often than I'm running /compact these days. I don't know, Pablo, if you agree with that, but
Same story for me. So
yeah.
I believe another tool that is also valuable is to take a look holistically at all overall life usage, optimize investment. In terms of compaction and clear, what I really is recommended as well as is possible to do is to summarize and share the context in like Markdown files or HTML files. So I was talking about other approaches. It's a combination of multiple techniques that you can utilize. One is compact, one is ask it to summarize and output to the empty file, and then recover your session from whatever you had, or recover it from a plan. So those utilities exist, and they need to be explored because there is different needs for such tool. Like for example, compaction. I personally use then I debug like heavily debugging like Kubernetes cluster or debugging my application, reading my flux. So my context fills up like very, very fast. And in order for me to control, I have to use multiple solutions.
Hooks are where Claude Code stops being kind of just helpful and starts being markedly reliable as well. So I find that if the context engineering is well crafted, that Claude is very trustworthy and that it's very consistent, and I don't have issues with it doing surprising things or ignoring them asking for it. It's all that stuff starts appearing when context starts falling apart or without giving you contradictory information and so on. However, if I'm in a production environment doing things that are very critical from a people's well-being perspective or financial decisions to be made and so forth, then hooks are a way to layer on additional security and additional checks that are deterministic or really black and white. One kind of word of wisdom about hooks is that they're sort of comparable from my point of view to triggers in databases, in that they're somewhat easy to set up, but quite expensive to run, and they can definitely affect performance. So be really careful about when you're triggering hooks and how often you're triggering them. What are the events that you're using to trigger them? Because again, they are being potentially triggered very, very often. And they generally look like what's shown here on the right. That is a post-tool use hook to run prettier, to run with it on code. And so they all basically consist of these lifecycle events, and then basically hook handlers, which can come in a variety of different flavors. You could have a shell command running where your script receives the events JSON input on standard input and then communicates results back through exit codes or standard out. You can have HTTP calls where you have a webhook sending the events JSON input to HTTP post request, for example, to an external URL for team-wide policy enforcement or things like that. You can have it send JSON to a prompt so you can forward it back to the agent and get a text response back and issue that somewhere. Or you can even spawn a subagent that can use tools with that output and do things with it. So very rich array of possibilities of what you can do with books. They are set in the .cloud settings.json file, which is thing to talk about in and of itself. That's basically your config file. And it has the same set of precedents across user level, repo level, and so forth. Moving on, so about the MCP protocol that a few people mentioned, want to hear more about. The model context protocol was started, or I want to say co-invented by Anthropic and made public. And it essentially has tools and servers or clients, as they're sometimes called. And essentially each MCP server has a set of tools that is associated with it. And those tools have permissions to either run without asking permission, ask confirmation, or they can be shut off and neutralized, forbidden from running as well. And yeah, essentially I would encourage anyone who's interested to not shy away from trying and building your own MCP. They might go easier than you think, especially with Claude's help. Very often there's something already out there that's better, but don't be too intimidated by MCPs. And the other, I guess, most important thing I would say, having talked a fair amount about already, is that they are an important kind of thing to keep an eye on in terms of security. So as a developer, you're probably familiar with NPM modules and kind of a lot of the OWASP and other announcements that get made about some code base getting reached because of NPM module changes. MCPs are a little bit similar in that they are code in a box that's really easy to import and run. So it's worth kind of taking a little bit of time to make sure that you know where those tools are being imported from, that they're coming from reputable companies or developers, and that maybe if you are responsible for those MCPs, that as an IT admin or DevOps person or security person, you actually know what's running inside of you. So any of these are available to look at. They're being loaded through NPS or UBX, and probably access the code and take a look at what's running. And then tag your version so that you're not getting imports that you weren't intending to get. So just a few kind of things to be aware of with MCPs, but generally they're wonderful tools and they're absolutely a great solution for the problem that they address. And you will, in the workshop, set up a browser MCP, so you'll get to get sense for how that runs. And then two more, and then we'll work our way, I think, for a demo, if I remember the slide sequence correctly. So plugins. I think someone asked about sort of plugin structure and so on. Now that you know these primitives, you can see that essentially, I keep doing that. You can see that you have skills, agents, hooks. These are all in the same format that you've just kind of familiarized yourself with, but they are now under a plugin folder. And this is what's called the manifest, or what is essentially showing the contents of that plugin to Claude. So telling it what it can find there. And that also has the version number or a tag associated with that particular version of the plugin. So Claude can sense automatically when it needs to run an update and pull in the latest version, if it's set that way, or you can do it manually. And so the nice thing about plugins is once your Claude session is opened with /plugin, you can very easily follow a set of prompts and install or uninstall pretty large sets of tools in a very convenient way. And one kind of type up from plugins are marketplaces, which are usually GitHub repos, or they can be local, and they contain collections of plugins. So you can add these marketplaces into Claude Code and then choose which plugins from that marketplace you like install. And that's pretty much it. It's very simple, manage, and very convenient to give you very powerful tools. Anthropic has its own marketplace that's, I think, by default officially available. There are lots of others out there to explore. Any questions about that? Okay. Oh, yes.
There's so many features. I guess how do you train your minds into deciding like this should be a plugin versus this is an agent? What's the like mental model for those decisions?
So the question is, how do you, with all of these types and all this flexibility, how do you decide what's a skill, what's plugin, etc.? Again, Paul's demo will start helping you develop an intuition for that. I think that's a long and nuanced answer. And I would say there are a couple different aspects. I think in time you'll develop an intuition for. One is managing context. So like if the skill uses less context, that might be a good way to go if I had it running all the time and so on. Other things are kind of, what do you want it to do? What does it need to do that? And then, all right, what is the type of context resource that I should build to allow it to do that? And that's kind of the thought process that will help you decide one direction to head at. Yes.
Are there any protocols that are being enforced in all of these topics? Constantly harvested the marketplace, purpose. Then are there any?
These structures are fairly hard coded. So if you don't have metafins, for example, to plug it, generally won't work. And so a lot of this stuff, it's pretty built out. And sorry for not repeating that. Your question was, are there protocols for all of these types? Short answer, yes, are there. It depends on which kind of protocol you're looking for if you're looking for security. I would say that it's early enough that they're still being established in many cases. But some companies are further along than others, but I would say there's no kind of standardized or unified standard.
Do you guys have something that we to pull?
Honestly, I would say we have some best practices, but do we have a hard-coded protocol yet? No, we don't. But we definitely have, people have a lot of opinions, and we have, some beginnings of that. So I wouldn't say we have everything worked out, But I would say we have built systems for financial services or critical systems, so we have delved into that and come up with some systems based on where things are now. But I think things are very much still in flux in many cases.
Thank you.
So might say in Saw target, what does it actually just moving these into the folder, or there's something else start?
In the workshop, I think you'll get a sense for that. But essentially, Claude will walk you through a set of prompts in the terminal that begins with the /plugin commands. And then you'll see it's fairly intuitive for how you load a marketplace and then how you choose plugins within that marketplace and manage what's installed or what you'd like uninstalled and updated and so on. So to be continued, I think you'll see. Thanks. Sure. Okay. And the last type that I wanted to cover is sort of the most advanced. And so subagents, I spoke about the explore and plan subagents and kind of talked about some of the advantages of managing context with subagents. There's sort of one layer up, which are agent teams, which I think is still in beta. And that is essentially, if you're running a Claude session and you spin up the subagent, it's going to run within that session and show you the progress that subagent is making and so on. As you get into more advanced practices like harness engineering and so on, you may have multiple main threads talking to each other and chattering as equals. And that's more of agent to agent systems and protocols, and that gets more advanced because you're talking about I/O protocols and different tools, and it gets a lot more complex and much more expensive to run in terms of token usage and so forth. But I find that subagents are enough for 95% or more of the use cases I encounter. It's fairly rare that I encounter things where I'm beat. I can't do it any other way than to spin up a major team and a hardest, really robust system, at least for now. And there's a lot of tooling as well that's coming that will take care of a lot of those complexities for like managed agents and then systems like that, any of those. And so here you can see an agent definition, a subagent definition. It's in the Claude/agents folder. And this top section here is a typical format for front matter that you'll see in Scales and elsewhere. Howell will show you all about that. And generally, you'll see a description, tools that the agent is allowed, model it should use, and then a description, a more detailed set of instructions for what the agent should do. That's generally, what that will all look like. So you've been listening to me for roughly an hour and 15 or so. With that, I think if there are no questions, we can jump into the beginnings of the demos, and in about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll go into a coffee break. So Paul's call, maybe he can set off that set of subagents and show you how all that's working. And then we can watch it run while we have coffee and take a short break. After we're back, we will then start off the workshop itself and get hands-on. So thank you for listening. I hope you found that useful. And with that, I'll pass things off to Paul.
My name is Hal Corbett of this Provectus, and today I wanted to demonstrate key differences between what does the plate scale means and what the teams of agents or agents mean, and what is the difference between a plugin with agents and tasks and the tools versus just skills. So today's demo is about one critical task. So many jobs actually. It's doing some research, and research typically made on various topics, subtopics. And generally speaking, it is a task that could be easily be parallelized to several topics. For example, if I want to, let's say, research an AI agentic, frameworks, and I want to know what their libraries, what are the SDKs, what are the cloud solutions for that. And I would like to review it, and I want it to be in a certain manner with cited sources. I certainly can use deep research, but this task is most often executed on a particular topic. And one of the systems is a multi-research system. For example, we defined a skill where we started from a simple idea. Let's just ask Claude, right, and ask it to research some topic, and it will do everything in your main thread. And people pollute your context, and then you cannot use it anymore. You have clear that there are many quirks that goes into. As for the skill, you can certainly define your sub-agents that you need to spawn sub-agents, and generally speaking, in Claude, you have this command of agents, and then you can see what are the available agents for you to work with. And those agents could be called by an @ sign. It could be called transitively from your skill definition, and generally speaking, that is your general purpose sub-agents is a built-in functionality that doesn't follow any specific ruling. For example, you want to build a cloud architecture and you want to research a particular system on clock, and that alone will require you to define either your CLAUDE.md or define some particular context that is shared for all sessions. But what if you have multiple tasks that to be preferred? That way you want to isolate what context is particularly getting used for a particular task, and that that is the whole purpose of you isolating into subagents to isolate the context prime variable. It's not the only way to use subagents. Subagents can, for example, take the context of the main thread with you and perform the task and then submit the summary back to your main pair. I wanted to kick off while I'm doing the research on the skills, and I'll showcase what is the structure, what goes into that skill, what goes into the subagent definitions, and so let me just show you the prompt that was carefully crafted by Ondis. I only adapted it to make it work on the both scenarios where we call skill. We have this definition of the multi-agent research skill. This definition does not fall a lot because, for example, on the second screen, you can see that same skill under the same name, multi-agent research, that is local to my project repository, and I need to hold it. And it does indeed have a definition of what the report writer should do, what research prompt should do, and a skill definition. Those resources does not contain any front matter, so you cannot control. Can it call, for example, web fetch or search, Google search, or a particular tool? You cannot define, you cannot specify with the behavior, you cannot specify the model, exact model that is going to use for this particular task. You want to optimize for like less token usage, for example. And generally speaking, that is practically just your prompt that is getting injected of any task or any subagent that you would like to be triggered. As for the skill itself, it does indeed have the front matter. It does follow the same structure of naming conventions and descriptions. There are a lot more to that front matter. General definition is that you want to have a multi-agent research to be orchestrating other subagents that are going to be spawned, and they are going to perform a subtopic research. Here we define the trigger rule, how exactly it is getting executed. It is listing what not to be triggered for, and then some examples. The allow tool here is the agent because we don't want a main thread to essentially do any or like calling of the other tools besides subagent start. Then it is followed by a general workflow. There are multiple steps. There are file structure that needs to be followed. There are definition of how to spawn a researcher on a particular subtopic. And that's your generally orchestrator or coordinator. The problem with that is we do not restrict anything for that coordinator. We do not tell that exactly what tool to call or what prompt to use to write a research or then to use that. So it assumes that we need to spawn subagent and use the full content of the report writer tools. And essentially the subagent is free for all. It can do anything. It can RMRF. It can practically do anything because we have not specified it and we don't have full control over that. Meanwhile, that typically runs for 4 to 5 minutes. It loads the skills successfully. By default, nowadays, Claude has a budget for skills. And for example, if you set it to 2%, it will offload anything that you don't use within 5 flash sessions. So it will only enable what's here, what's in your configuration. So as you can see that the primary agent executes in the same context thread that we have. On the bottom, you can see how fast tokens are getting consumed. And also for each particular agent, you can see that it was spawned without any prior knowledge. For example, if you go to general purpose, we can still use, we could see that it is calling web search. It is so far following, like a very normal utilization of the tools. So by the end of this task, it does not, it only creates a supporting information for the report writer, which is going to be not a separate agent that can, for example, follow a particular formatting of your research task. Let's say reviewed, done technical rundown of blog post, let's say, and then you want to extract some knowledge from it, and then share or create PowerPoint from it, or use it in your Claude Code work. You want it to be structured in a particular way, so it's rhetoric correctly. All right. And as you can see, like it's finishing up pretty quickly. So what it finished the agentic architectural pattern and the agent frameworks and SDKs. Soon it is going to finish with the other subagents and other subtopics. In order for us to see how is this finishing, we can capture the agentic AI 2026. It is creating the research nodes over here, and you could see the files appear that are written by subagents to facilitate the overall report write. We now specify that we don't want to be exceeding 1,000 words. We want all of those 4 topics to be, condensed to a particular size. And what we expect this to do is to spawn a report writer to synthesize, and sometimes, and it's 50-50 for me, and I try to make it happen so that it's the main context thread. But it spawns the necessary research writer that utilizes all of the subtopics and that just purchases all together and rewrites it over to its summaries. The ideal way is that once it generates, I'll show you how like this markdown file is rendered. It shows some basic structure, and generally speaking, it's not right out of the box available for you to share. And if you want to build a system that is more complicated, that has like particular perks in terms of how you style your your diagrams, or style your table contents, or style the headings, you more likely to want to utilize something that parses this markdown file, verifies that it's in a particular format, verifies that it's there, while we are writing the research report. And what we want to do is for Claude to figure it out by itself, us only defining what exactly we expecting, what template we expected, and then a validation step of, I validated that it is indeed in this template, and that ensures that.
So we can see that it's wrote that, and we can go back here.
So as you can see here on the right side, but that's just a raw markdown file. There's no table of contents. We can copy. Let me show how it can render. As you can see, pretty basic structure, sections, everything that we like. It's only headers, but you cannot navigate this file. You cannot differentiate between what's what's not. There is no formatting applied here. And there is also no citations. And that's a primary call that we did not specify that we want citations. We did not specify that we want specific formatting. And even if we do, we did not write any scripts, right? So the general idea of that same document and same task is to be able to do it all. And that is possible to do with just bare skill. It is possible to do with agents. And the reason for you to use agents here is to restrict certain tool use. We don't want our report writer to do a web search and challenge the findings of the researchers. We don't want to do it. Like, we want to only write a report based on certain rules. And for that reason, we have a SWE marketplace. That's an open source tool. If you'd like to see it as better, you're absolutely free to take a look at this. So here, the Claude plugin is structured as described. There are keywords, there are pages, there are skills that this plugin explodes. So essentially, then I enable this plugin, immediately the agent definitions are available to me, the skills by themselves are available to me, and also certain templates attached of how we can use that. As I mentioned, we want a research report to be structured in a certain way based on the content. So if that's the research node for an example, technology research node. Then we would like to follow the key sources. We would like to follow key topics. We would like to have a summary. Then there is an example too for market analysis node. There are competitor analysis node, and probably like key characteristics that are important for our research. Then there is research request examples. That is to tell CLAUDE then we want to execute what we want to execute. It is generally our semantic way of what to do. We have a skill coordinator. We want this to be like an entry point. Previously, we have an entry point of multi-agent research where we specified everything, like how coordinator operates, how report writers operate, and where to read the general prompt, how to spawn subagents. Here we define almost same things. Besides, we would specify a general logicals. What exact agents do it need? If it has the same limitations, you want to spawn a task, you want to use makedir to create a project folder for our research runs, we want to have current date in our searches, we want to have current date in our reports. We want to be able to search for those files and be able to read. And it will not go to your MCP server, it will not go to your database and kill everything. It will, generally speaking, will only use those signals. It simply does not exist in the context of what that particular skill be or trimming. Then we have an available tools in this workflow that to spawn the research specialist and research report writer. Those are our definition of those agents. Those agents correspond also with, they also have different matter. You can specify the model they are six. So you don't have to waste your expensive Opus tokens on like a basic web search task. You don't want to do. And maybe you want to do a Sonnet model, you want to do it with Haiku model. And in order for you to figure it out, you actually need also, the skill verifiers and just play around and take a look at this. So, but that's a very nice capability for you to save on consigs or tokens. There is also a very valuable thing to manage, especially that you have multiple agents running, multiple terminals running. You want to be able to differentiate between colors of like subagents so you can quickly identify what you are doing. So that's one of the capabilities here. So colors. For each agent, you can define what hooks getting executed, then this agent is working. So essentially, that's our stopping point. If we edit out Terraform, we don't want TypeScript hook to be triggered on any edit. We don't want that. And this is the place where you define this. The same goes for skill. You can define the memory scope of that, like where to extract and what to use it. This teleproject scope user. There is all kinds and sorts of configurations, which you can definitely find in the Claude Code documentation as well. Because Claude, what from matters fields do I have? Skills. The baseline is of the agent. This tells it also what to do, how to do it, if this also works in some sense. And my thing is like here I give it instructions on what to use and what to not mix as well. Kind of like a skill. So at the same time, there's a higher level abstraction that could do all kinds of tasks. So right now we have only one task, which is a skill of jump over user. Ideal to you want to have several tasks be skills visualization. Like one of the examples for me is this. I use the Cloud specialist. It can do cloud architecture on AWS or cloud architecture Microsoft Azure, or it can equally be knowledgeable about Pulumi and Terraform. And for me, it's nice because now I don't have to spawn 4 agents, and I have a single agent that several skills that pretty. So I guess that's all for, and this is the research complete. And as you could see, the report was written also by a subagent. I hope that it gets showcased where there are failure modes for Claude. And let me trigger the plugin system so you can see what is the difference between executing it as a plugin versus as just. It's the same practical prompt. Here I just define user search team per search engine in Drupal reports, and it immediately found their search coordinator skill, which our first data, so it knows that it needs to create the folder, it needs to spawn subagents, that you can see it that each subagent follows the color code is of green, each report writer is purple, and it has a particular prompt definition for each of the tasks. So for example, here you can see your specific research assignment architectural patterns. And that definition by itself is getting auto-generated by like a main thread, right? That's Spunk's dash. And in the definition, I'm only able to do a web search, so it is being able to go and look up for anything in your content directory, let's say. This, on contrary, also should be under 2.5 minutes, like specifically timed it to be this way. But you can control how many agents you spawn in your coordinator code. You can define how many dual calls, how many searches to do to like finish fast, and also how many iterations and how many buckets.
If I want to check my responses and against a certain order, right, where would I build this thing? What response you themselves get a response? I just want to make sure it's the appropriate response. If I can pass it from, I use Sonic to like generate the response. Can I pass it to Opus to like make sure the response is right upon my Twitter?
So it's a good question. The question is how to validate responses from less capable models by more capable ones. And yet the simple answer is yes, absolutely do it. And that's one of the patterns that now exist in the advisory tool. So advisor tool is using where, for example, you run a task as your Sonnet model, and then it struggles to find that is it okay to use that tool, or is it okay and then I generate this code? Keep offers for advising of the ops, so it is natively supported now feature. However, in the cart work, that is the sole reason for you to utilize subagent, because you want to define what model it exclusively is. So you want to define a coordinator as opus model, so it knows that it needs to synthesize that report and the strategy and the plan for the report writer to unify all of the aspects. And so, or then you're like reviewing the code. You want to spawn 4 agents that have their own opinions, and then coordinator needs to know like what is important, what's actually interesting and actually available for users, so that none of the agents house. So that's one way where you on agent definition use this the model, and then use this a larger model on the coordinator orchestrator side that will hit support of the lower model. There are certain semantic rules on how you, like, throughout your experience that you can define. Oh, okay, like modifications to CSS paths or HTML. That's probably a hype task. And if you define a specific agent that is sort of zap is that.
Would that be a hook, or would that be like a even more agent, subagent, and a customer? So it's
What a question. Do you have to tell your skill which engines to call and in what sequence, if there is a dependencies?
Yeah.
And where do you figure that?
So, for example, in your coordinator skill, you specify what's available, and then you specify particular steps. If you can see steps here, I mean, from IT and create from directories, then to researcher subagents. This is how to spawn it. Here is particular subagents definition to execute. Then we need to wait for all reports to happen over there. Then you can specify optionality, you can specify conditionals even, and this is the place for your semantic rules. I like to think of skills as functions, that like a skill as a first citizen in this system. So I like to think of them as a repeatable annotation calls. However, they're much more powerful than just your regular button. So here, for example, for the research writer, we also want it to know that there are other tasks exist. For example, like a droplet research skill that actually fills our agent to format job to format it in a particular way, and I guess that still runs. And let me show before wrapping up, as takes a little bit more time than I anticipated. Oh, just so as you can see, the report writer self-wrote task. We can analyze what he was doing, just reading and writing, and it was scoring the job leader search skill. So that he knows about the formatting goals, it knows about how to execute, uh, how to forward it with CSS aware, with formatting, go blocks, etc. How to do it exactly. And the difference between this one and what we had is something like this. So now in our structure, we have table contents, we have an executive summary that is noted, we have e-table formatting, we have citation and links, right, like the resources section under cool sections. And also it has citations for all of the sources that it was able to web search because for like all the ages. So now you can ensure that, yeah, like I'm happy with the results and I'm able to verify it. There is a lot more that I want to talk about actually, and I spent eternity actually explaining it because for the past year I've been studying it under huge ones. I hopeful that it was valuable for you. And in case you have any questions, I'm in the row. Just come ask it. I will be prepared to answer it.
What's the largest number of agents, parallel agents you've risen? Like how far can it go?
So that's very good question. Is how and the direct question is how many agents are you capable of running under normal circumstances and not losing your mind? My personal number is around 5 or 6 sessions that I can run simultaneously. I believe there are now an increasing demand for tooling that supports managing multiple agents. That helps significantly, but the main limitation is not the hardware, is not the model, is not the code that we all receive, but rather our coordinated load. I would say that's the most overworked factor in this page. Yeah, but you can run as many as 100 because like just yesterday I was spouting, I don't know like how many of them, like different kinds of it. But I wasn't responsible for orchestrating and managing them directly. Have it a more autonomous manner. But that requires harnesses, that requires a lot of tools to support that.
I wanted to just add one remark to everything that Pavel said. Thank you for the demo. Awesome. And just like worth mentioning that in normal circumstances, you would not be running a plugin and a skill that are doing almost exactly the same thing in one system that's redundant. That doesn't make sense. But hopefully this, like what Pavel showed you, shows you a delta between kind of what a skill is and what a plugin is, and helps you also develop an intuition for when you would choose one or the other. And that plugin, as you can see, is something pretty close to kind of the basic functionality of Perplexity, where you get cited sources and consistent formats and so forth. So pretty rich result that can be used for a wide array of use cases and so forth. So, yeah, thank you again, Paul, for.
Yep. I just wanted to showcase like what teams of agents mean and how they gear to peer. It's unscripted, I'm sorry. I just launched it and you'll see how it like magically spawns. If you want to surprise anybody for like doing an agentic workflow and like in Lewis and Matrix and you operator and you do all kinds of stuff, that is the closest thing that I was able to make like to look like. So on the screen you can see like I wrote simple fuzzy stuff like where two agents argue on a particular topic right now. So it's going to spawn teams of agents with one orchestrator, which is the main thread, and two agents that are completely isolated sessions where they talk to each other and they debate and they argue and they want to come up into certain truth. And that's the closest thing that I was able to make. You can see that there are 3 agents now. You can see them from the main thread as well. You can switch from main thread to every other agent over here, or the team main as they call it. And also you can see individual sessions. So if you want, you can, just let it like steer in some particular way. All right. So that's a conversation between Rick from Rick and Morty and Caveman, and that will generate an audio file. The other day it was just for fun, but yeah,
If you listen to the audio file, the happy hour session.
yes. Only up at the happy hours. Right.
The NDAs will be required to sign first. So that's the first part. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you, Andis, for the workshop, the presentation. We're about to go on break. We'll call it 10 minutes, so 5 after. We'll come back and we'll do the actual Anton workshop piece of it. I'll get the lights turned back on, and we're going to put up here a QR code for a survey. We would love it if you click that. Doesn't be right away, be at the end. But sometime before you leave, you would mind please playing up. Sure, really appreciate it. Your feedback's really important. I'll go into your previous workshops. All right. Thank you.